chapter, when your authors open up the chapter by showing a picture of a statue of Pericles, whom we will talk at some length about later. And then Pericles, during the war between Athens and Sparta, Pericles was the head of Athens. During the war, he gave a big funeral speech praising how great democracy was and how wonderful democracy was. Regrettably, democracy lost its initial fight against a structured state, Sparta. But that's something I'm going to go into detail a whole lot more later. Now, the Greeks were unlike a lot of the other ancient peoples we study. In some respects, for the first time we run into the word constitution. They set up a document for several of those states that we call a constitution, which they tried to live by and abide by. And as time went on, they found out that what suited one generation, they thought, hey, we've got a constitution that would not suit a later generation. And believe me, a lot of the things that we do in the name of the Constitution today, the original writers of the Constitution would never dream of doing. But nevertheless, they had the same problems. They also had among them religious skeptics. Persons who questioned the existence of the gods. Now, in the ancient world, you don't have any of this. The Near Eastern peoples seem to have all been believers. Now, in India, of course, we don't know if Buddha believed there's a God. We don't know if Confucius did. But these men lived a bit later. In the earlier part of the history of mankind, there seems to have been no skeptics among them. But to the Greeks, you have a few people who questioned whether the gods even existed or what role they played in human life. So they were somewhat more like modern man in that regard also. Now when you talk about Greece, first thing we remember is way back, early in its history, Greece may have been united. But Greece consisted of a whole lot of mountains. Matter of fact, if you look at Greece on a map, you'll find it's somewhat split in two by a big gulf that almost splits it in two. And then look at the geography, and they have a whole lot of really tall, rugged mountains. And they separated one city-state from another. So you had the city-state, or polis. Where the city-state was where each city was its own state. You'd have a city-state here, and another one here, and another one here, and another here. They never could unite themselves. Well, they finally were united by an outsider named Philip Macedon, but they never could unite themselves. And one reason, the tall, rugged mountains guaranteed that if an army decided to cross, by the time they crossed, their troops would be tired, they'd have lost some of their equipment. By the time they got the other side of the mountain, they'd be not quite as strong in fighting as would the other city-state be that was fighting at home. So the mountains helped keep the Greeks divided. But in a division, they were free to experiment with different kinds of government. And they experimented with several kinds of government, one of which was democracy. Of course, they had royalty, they had the kings, then they had oligarchs. Well, I'll explain. I'll just go ahead and do that too. Frequently, a Greek city-state would start out with a rule by the king. Then, as the king lost favor, they'd get a rule by a few called oligarchs. That means rule by the rich. The wealthy people would get together, and only the wealthy people could take time to tend to visit the government, because the ordinary person had to spend too much time tending to his farm. Rule by government. And then eventually the rule of oligarchs might give way to a tyranny. Now the word tyrant today has a bad connotation. Actually, I'm going to back up a bit. back up. The king would start off with the king, yes. And then he would lose favor, and they'd have a rule by a tyrant. Then the oligarchs would take over. Then the oligarchs would give way to democracy. Now, we in America seem to really be proud of our democracy, that it's the greatest thing that ever happened. In Greek times, democracy developed a bad name because democracy had a tendency to eventually revert right back to a rule by one man, whether you call him a king or a tyrant. And the whole cycle then would start all over again. When democracy had resulted in as much chaos as the people could stand, they would ask that some strong man take over and bring order. And we have seen that happen many, many a time in the modern world. Was it this class I talked about Singapore last time? No, it wasn't. Okay, basically here's something that happened in Singapore during my lifetime. Right after Singapore got its independence from some European country, they developed democracy to try to be like European countries, like the United States. Under the democracy, crime ran rampant. If you want to go shopping, you better get about 8 or 10 men together, and they each of them armed just to go down the street to go to the local supermarket or the marketplace. And the crime was so bad that the people finally demanded a dictatorship. So they picked Liu Yan as a dictator, and Liu Yan brought order to the place by taking over and running the place, and everybody loved it. But how did Liu Yan do this? He took offenders and set them over a table and had a martial arts expert beat them several times with a cane as punishment. And one American wound up getting caned. He was accused of spray painting a bunch of cars. This American, Michael Fay, by name, had what's called attention deficit disorder. He was accused of spray painting cars. President Clinton called Liu Yan and asked that the sentence be reduced, so Liu Yan reduced the sentence from 6 canings, 6 licks to 4. Michael Caine was hit 4 times by a martial arts expert, and he went back to the United States and got in trouble in the United States again. But he never did go back to Singapore. Now, when Americans first heard of this, it was found in a poll that 38% of Americans favor this kind of punishment. Well, why would any American favor? Because Americans are tired of having their gardens vandalized, their mailboxes knocked down by a bunch of punk kids. And they demand, and Socrates was telling us 2,300 years ago, when people have too much freedom, eventually they start demanding somebody come along to bring order. The bad people in Singapore saw they either had to change their ways or leave Singapore. Your good, honest, upright, hard-working people found they had nothing to fear anymore. Anyway, Liu Yan was one of the best examples of dictator you find. A lot of dictators become corrupt. Liu Yan, yeah, he killed a few people, but the only people who deserved to be killed. And the rest of the people felt safe because he brought order out of the chaos. Again, this is what democracy eventually became to mean in Greece. Chaos, disorder, disharmony. All right, now that's the overview. Now let's start with the first part of Greek history. And I want to give you a theme that I've given several times already. Oh. If you read what the Greeks said about themselves, nobody today believes it. Now that's true whether it be the earlier history of the Jews. I mean, your authors come right out plain and say we don't believe what the Jews said about themselves. But what the Jews said about their own history is tame compared to what the Greeks said about theirs. I mean, they talked about one-eyed cyclops and persons who could transform themselves into snakes and then back to humans again. And well, monsters that would gobble up people, dragons, stories. I mean, all kinds of stories about magical deeds, mystical deeds, and gods that we simply don't believe. That's this, but what we have reconstructed The earlier Greeks seem to have been seagoing people. The first Greeks we know about were the Minoans. The Minoans lived on the island of Crete. And again, if you look at the map, there are two islands in the Mediterranean, Crete here and Cyprus. Crete being much closer to Greece than Cyprus is. Now, apparently these people were quite wealthy, the Minoan people. We have found some of their writings, and what we have found, though, is not really much interesting as far as history goes. It's palace inventories, furniture inventories. And they apparently traded with Tyre here, the people of Tyre. They traded with Egypt and traded with Italy. And to the west, there was a mystery city called Tarsus that's mentioned in the Bible and a whole lot of other ancient literature that we really don't know much about. But possibly a city of Spain, large area. Anyway, they were traders. Then all of a quick sudden, it seems that their civilization came to an abrupt end. And it might have been caused by a tidal wave, or what we today call a tsunami. Tsunamis are known to have once been much, much worse than they are now and much bigger. And possibly as an earthquake hit and a tsunami came in, washed everything off. Yes?
Not a minute earlier, the theory was that, I forget what island it was, but a piece of the whole island just kind of fell into the ocean and covered Minoan like palace.
Yeah.
The other was a possibility that the Minotaur story was based on Minoan because they found they had a ceremony that involved a bull being let loose in the lower part of the castle.
Yeah.
And the frescoes show boys or young men trying to best it.
The monster. Yeah. Yeah, that. Are you saying a sea monster might have come in?
You know what I'm saying? It's like the Minoan Island, I forget what island it was, but it was a volcano that erupted that caused part of Minoan Island to fall into the ocean.
Oh, fall, yeah, okay, fall in the ocean.
And there's a possibility that was since they were way close to where the water would have been at the time.
Oh, yeah.
It just kind of covered the whole thing.
Possibility. Well, see, again, it's a mystery. It's believed that tidal waves and earthquakes and things like that were one time worse than they are now. Okay, I'd better stop.